Welcome to Occupy TV, where we talk about the issues that gave rise to the Occupy movement. This episode, we'll be talking about the real trickle-down effect, its victims in our local economy, and how it affects the 99%. Joining us today is Fergus Maclean from Bankbusters and Emily Reiman, the Opportunity Works Manager at NEDCO, the Neighborhood Economic Development Corporation.
We have a problem in the United States where there's a housing crisis with 18.5 million vacant homes and 3.5 million people who are homeless. So there's a surplus of housing for people that are homeless. Eugene is regarded as a human rights city, and what that means is they've adopted the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and Article 25.1 says a lot of things, but one of them is that housing is a human right. Well, here in Eugene, that's not being respected, it's not being followed. So our campaign is trying to address this problem. And we have long-term and short-term goals. So our long-term goals, these could take years to accomplish, and that is that Eugene as a community regards housing as a human right, and also that Eugene communities have control over land via community land trusts or other vehicles. So people have the power to say how their land gets used. Our short-term objectives, what we can accomplish within 6 months, we feel are to help people stay in their homes because they're being foreclosed on or evicted. We can help them stay in their homes or help people become housed, and also empower people through education resources to stay in their homes.
I started getting less work and was unable to make my mortgage payments. Bought my house in 2008 for $190,000, and in December of 2011, I heard about Occupy and was thinking that I might have to go into foreclosure because I couldn't make my payments. And so I went to Occupy. I found out that my home was actually worth more like $120,000. I still owed $170,000, so it's the typical underwater story. And went to a GA and talked with some people there. Ross Howard, Reed Kimball, and they recommended that I come to the foreclosures meeting and met some other people who were into working on foreclosures and different options and solutions, and just really started diving into the internet and trying to learn more about foreclosures. Last summer, I tried to do a modification through Wells Fargo. They're the ones that have my loan. And it was the typical modification thing where you send in applications and applications and they still want more information. And so that took about 3 or 4 months, and they said I wasn't eligible because I had not made enough payments to prove that I would be able to make payments. That was because I did a refinance to try to desperately save my house the year before. So I'm just kind of heading into foreclosure. I, at some point in the fall, decided that I wasn't going to fight it and I was going to go ahead and go for a short sale. And sometimes that feels like a failure. On the other hand, it's going to get me out of this situation. It's kind of stressful to be living in a place under foreclosure because they can kick you out at any moment. And so with a short sale, I kind of know when I'm going to leave. I'm living here now in my new home, and it's a lot smaller. I went from 3-bedroom house to 1 room, but I have great roommates, so that helps. And I'm supposed to close on the short sale at the end of this week, but they're dragging their feet, and Wells Fargo says I have to close by Friday or they won't let this go through. So it's still a little bit of stress, but hopefully be over by the end of this month. If I was having difficulty making my payments, one of the things I would do first would be to get on the internet and just do as much investigation as I can. I really found the Occupy Homeowner Support Group was so helpful because they taught me about things like MERS, the Mortgage Electronic registration system, which I wasn't even aware of. There it was on my papers in black and white, but I didn't know what it meant. Get with somebody who's going through this or has gone through this, because they can say, oh, this is what it's going to be like. You're going to apply for a modification and this is how it goes. And that was one of the big things that I wanted when I started was, how long is this going to take? I've stopped making my mortgage payments. When are they going to start calling me every day? When are they going to start sending me, I call it paper bombing. They send you 5 letters, then you have to sign for 3 more, and it's the exact same letter. Then they'll have the FedEx guy coming. I mean, they must have spent hundreds of dollars on FedExes alone for no reason, and just calls every other day. And if you ignore the call, the phone rings again in 2 hours. So there are ways of dealing with it. You don't have to take the calls, and you can tell them to stop harassing you. There's different laws, consumer laws that you can use. And so just learning about all that stuff gives you the power and the confidence to not feel so insecure, because these banks they really kind of go after you, and it's kind of scary.
In the media, people have been talking about Bank of America as zombies. They were resurrected from the dead in 2008 because of the bailout. And for all intents and purposes, they should have died. They shouldn't have brought back from the dead. They shouldn't have been resurrected with their $45 billion in bailouts.
I think they're
get their checks cashed or deposited, and we hope to encourage them to move their money. We have a flyer here that says 3 different ways that Bank of America has been bankrupting America, and we have 3 different community credit union options that we can give them. We need to pull the plug on Bank of America. Since 2008, they've been terrorizing America with illegal proposals, rents of $5 debit cards, and even more bailouts possibly, because their credit rating is absolutely abysmal right now. And so there could be more bailouts in the future. But we don't want that. We can't afford that as a country.
That way.
Occupy Wall Street started as a result of our collective anger about the crimes committed by Wall Street. And the housing and foreclosure crisis is a direct result of their crimes. And thousands are suffering here in Lane County, not only because of people that are homeless, but also people where their housing values are dropping like a rock because there's a home that's vacant and being vandalized, and people are underwater, which means that they owe more than their home is worth. So this is affecting nearly everyone in Lane County. And we've been helping people since December of 2011, and we need more support so that we can do a lot more and be more effective.
Welcome to Occupy TV. I'm Camilla Mortensen, and we're here with Fergus Maclean to talk about Bankbusters. You might have seen Bankbusters picketing Bank of America downtown, and Fergus is here to talk about what they're doing.
Bank of America, along with the other big banks, has gotten away with such atrocities and taken so much public money that we feel it's only right that somebody should be pointing that out on an ongoing basis.
And I understand you've been working on the Occupy Foreclosure Committee?
Right. I joined the Occupy Foreclosure Committee about a year ago. We've had about 50 people come to us. It's interesting. I think every single one of the people who's come to us has said the bank told them, we can't help you until you've missed 3 payments. And there is actually no reason for that except that after you've missed 3 payments, you can be put in foreclosure.
So they're actually almost encouraging them to go into further debt?
No, they're encouraging them to put themselves in a position where they can be foreclosed on. The banks are utterly cynical and merciless.
And is that legal for them to be doing that?
Unfortunately, it is. The reforms of the Dodd-Frank Act have changed very little. However, the bills in the Oregon legislature have much more teeth.
And those are current bills this session?
Yes. There was a very good bill passed last session, Senate Bill 1552. There are 2 kinds of foreclosure. There's foreclosure in the courts and foreclosure basically that happens on the courthouse steps.
Okay.
Senate Bill 1552 regulated foreclosures that happen out of court. But shortly after the bill was passed, the Oregon Court of Appeals ruled that the system the banks are using to record deeds, called MERS, it's the Mortgage Electronic Registration System, the banks set that up so they wouldn't have to pay the $42 a page it costs to record documents at the county. The Court of Appeals ruled that that process could not be used in the non-judicial process. And so that put a stop to everything that was regulated by Senate Bill 1552 last session, which the main point of 1552 was it required mediation. It required the banks to sit down and talk with a homeowner before initiating foreclosure.
Where are the bills now? Are they working through the legislature or in committee, or is there an opportunity for public to comment on the bills?
There is a bill, Senate Bill 558. Senator Lee Byer of Springfield has been a leader in this from the beginning, and he's a co-sponsor of 558. And basically what Senate Bill 558 does is it applies the same mediation requirements on the banks as last year's bill applied to non-judicial foreclosures. The Attorney General has come out in favor of it. There's a lot of support in the legislature for Senate Bill 558, and they are having hearings on it now.
And what sort of foreclosure assistance has the Occupy Committee been able to do?
The main thing that really we accomplished, in my opinion, is providing a forum, because the people who come to us are, as you can imagine, in desperation, because it's very difficult to defend against foreclosure. There are few attorneys who will defend a foreclosure case competently, and they're quite expensive, and usually by the time the people would come to us, they're out of funds. And we're able to help them in some procedural ways, but the main benefit was just helping them with their isolation and finding someone who can give them the little bit of information that we had, which is it's a very lonely situation. They're up against these multinational banks, and they're just unscrupulous and merciless.
And foreclosure is not the only debt that people run into. Student loan debt, credit cards, how does that tie in with what's going on with the banks right now?
There are a lot of similarities. What drove the financial bubble that popped in 2008 was associated with the mortgage electronic registration system. The banks were taking normal mortgages and turning them into investment vehicles and changing them in very strange ways. Under financial deregulation, they were able to do very strange things. They were leveraging that paper 20, 30, 40 times, making fantastic profits on it. And actually, you're right, they do the same thing with student loans and credit card debt. It's all behind the curtain, and it's highly questionable, and it's actually very possibly illegal. A lot of it's illegal, but the banks are so big, and the lawyers are so good, and they have so much political influence that it's very difficult to get traction on dealing with that. And that's why Oregon is really an important battleground for this struggle right now, because the Supreme Court is reviewing the mortgage electronic registration system, and if the court rules against it, that would be a tremendous blow to the banks. And also the Senator Byers' bill, Senate Bill 558, believe it or not, if the banks had to sit down with homeowners before foreclosing and tell the truth, they say the entire economy would collapse.
Because they talk.
Because what they do will not bear scrutiny.
Mm-hmm. So what can people do? Obviously there's bills in legislature, there's picketing. Is there a solution to the banks, some other type of banking, some other system?
Well, Camille, there was a window of opportunity to reform the banks after the collapse. Mm-hmm. The Dodd-Frank bill came out of it, but unfortunately that opportunity was missed, and the banks were reflated with trillions of dollars in public money and acquired such political power that some people call it, we're ruled now by a bankruptocracy. They are zombie banks. They're not viable financial institutions, but because of all the money that's been pumped into them, they are in complete control. And instead of getting smaller, they've gotten bigger. Instead of being regulated, they've gotten more powerful. They need to be taken down.
Let's talk a little bit more about not just the bank money, but also money in politics, both on a national level with Citizen United, but also does that have an effect on the local level as well?
I haven't really followed that. I don't know. Well, not so much at the local level, on the state level. Mm-hmm. The Oregon Bankers Association is a very powerful lobby, and they wield a lot of influence, and their demands are quite outrageous. Actually, they have put a bill in the Senate Bill 804, that basically eviscerates the Oregon Trust Deed Act. It would require no mediation for foreclosure, requires extensive, unnecessary, tremendous, burdensome documentation from someone trying to defend themselves against foreclosure. The timeline is unworkably short. It legalizes foreclosing at the same time they're pretending to modify the loans. It eliminates their need to give notice to tenants whose rental is entering foreclosure.
Oh, wow.
One really big problem with foreclosure is if your home is underwater and it sells and it doesn't cover the due amount, that you are billed for that. That's called a deficiency judgment. Senate Bill 804 legalizes deficiency judgment. This can be crushing. In this market, if you're $100,000 underwater and you do a short sale, you get a 1099 for $100,000 that you have to pay taxes on. If you do a short sale for $200,000 on your $300,000 home, you get a 1099 for that $100,000 and have to pay taxes on it.
I'm actually going to ask you to take a step back for those of us who are new or unfamiliar with some of these things, but what does it mean for example, for a home to be, or a mortgage to be underwater? And is that when you're behind on the payments, or?
It means the amount owed on the property is more than it's worth. There was a 40% reduction in home values with the crash of 2008, and still about almost 15 to 20% of homes in America are underwater. People owe more on their property than they're worth.
And then what is a short sale?
A short sale is when you're in foreclosure process. Instead of going to foreclosure, you make a deal with the bank that you're going to sell the property for what the market will give, and you're going to turn the receipts over to the bank. It simply saves the bank from going through the legal costs of foreclosure.
Okay. So you were saying earlier with the Foreclosure Assistance Committee, is that one of the things that you help with, I guess, is the isolation you were saying?
Right.
If you're a family who's bought a home and you thought everything was great and suddenly you're underwater, is that something that you found people have difficulty being able to talk about with fellow neighbors who they assume are going to judge them for that?
There's a tremendous amount of shame associated with not being able to make your house payments. And it's very confusing. You get these legal documents in the mail. You don't know what to do. You don't know who to talk to. There isn't anybody to talk to unless typically, the lawyers will ask you for $5,000 to sit down and talk to you. So it's a very difficult position to be in. And it was quite frustrating for me that even though we had this great bill passed in the legislature last year by the Lane County delegation was a big part of that, it didn't turn out to help, and really we haven't really been able to do anything for these people. A few procedural things. Actually, we did manage to stop a eviction in Douglas County last month. Actually filed a couple of motions in Douglas County Circuit Court and went to Judge Aiken's court, Federal District Court, and basically just the Douglas County attorney just got nervous enough so that he actually canceled the eviction. So this person is staying in their home. But the victories are few and far between. They'll wear you down. These are $500 an hour attorneys. They'll just beat you up, and their scruples in court are just shocking. Maybe that's the way all lawyers do it, but they'll come in and they'll just do everything wrong and file for a dismissal. And you better have a lawyer who knows all those laws so they can tell the judge, no, they're doing this wrong, they're doing this wrong, they're doing this wrong. And there aren't many lawyers like that around. And there's not a lot of money in defending people who are being foreclosed. So that's why I have moved on, and we have another group that is trying to deal with the bigger question of banks and debt in the American economy.
And is that Bankbusters, or is that?
That's Bankbusters.
Okay, that is Bankbusters. So it sounds like the Oregon delegation, or from this area to the legislature, is pretty sympathetic to the foreclosure issue. What about at a county level? How are what are the politics like going on here in terms of, I guess, money controlling the politics? Well,
one of the big frustrations is trying to do this work is that it's very difficult to get good information, practically impossible. So we don't really know what's going on. Nationally, somewhere like 5% of the homes in America are empty, owned by the bank and not on the market. This mortgage electronic registration system the bank set up to avoid paying the county recorder has cost Lane County $10 million.
Oh, wow.
This county government is completely oblivious to this situation. The county could stop foreclosures.
How so?
It's a county process.
So if the
counties have established moratoriums, we've got no traction with the county commissioners. They've taken they're completely unconscious of this.
This is something that, so you've gone to the county commission and tried to introduce or talk to them about this and they've not been responsive?
No.
Why do you think not? Why would why would our state legislatures be responsive to helping people in the situation, and our county government, who apparently has the power to stop it, not step up?
Well, in the case of our county government, I think it's pretty clear that we're ruled in Lane County by the 1% or the 1/10 of 1% in the case of Faye Stewart, and they have very little regard for the needs of ordinary working people.
How do we fix that?
Well, in Bankbusters, our strategy is to at least do the same thing that we've done in Occupy for foreclosure, and at least provide some basic information to people who are struggling with their credit card debt and their student loan debt as a way of drawing people together, because simply sitting down with people who have gone through the same thing you have is enormously healing. And this is a terribly isolating. You lose your house and you disappear. You know, a lot of people go bankrupt, they go away, oh, you can't find them. You know, it's completely demoralizing and alienating. So, I mean, where do you start? I think where you start is you start informing people of what their rights are and how to protect themselves. And there's nobody in the government or in the private sector doing that, so somebody needs to do it. And our hope is that once we start doing that, we'll be able to start building a network that will at some point acquire some political clout.
And be able to start changing the situation?
This is not, even though the banks are the bullies in this situation, they are on extremely shaky ground. And they are extremely at risk. And one of their strongest defenses is that righting this situation would be very dangerous to the economy, to the stability of the economy. So it's not all a one-sided battle. It wouldn't take that much to stop these banks. But the judges, the realtors, the lawyers, they're so used to the way things are done that nobody wants to stick their neck out, and there's no money in it. It's a good question. There's one lawyer in town, Judson Carason, who's doing a great job stepping up and taking on these foreclosure cases. But it's really tough. They'll tie in knots and drag it out. You know, it's rough. So a combination of political lobbying, but really grassroots organizing is where it's got to start.
And I understand that there is a film coming up at Cosmic that's going to deal with some of economic issues.
Yes, it's really a wonderful story. The children's book, The Wonderful Wizard of Oz, is an allegory of a very similar kind of battle to what we're facing that was fought off during the last half of the 19th century between the banks and the farmers, particularly. The Wizard of Oz is an allegory of that struggle, and there's a documentary about that called The Secret of Oz. And Bankbusters will be showing that at Cosmic Pizza on April 8th at 6 o'clock. And we'll have some raffle items, and we're hoping to have some good conversation and raise some money.
And that'll be a fundraiser?
That's a fundraiser,
Okay.
yeah. We're partnering with Occupy Eugene.
Okay. And so there'll be admission at the door or donations or?
We'll take any money we can get.
And if people can't make the film, or if they just want to know more about Bankbusters and the kind of work you guys are doing, what is the best way to get hold of you? Or
We have an office in Growers Market, 454 Willamette, number 203. And our email address is occupybankbusters@gmail.com. And our Twitter account is @BustTheBanks.
And is there a phone number as well?
541-937-3034.
Great. Well, this has been Occupy TV. I'm Camilla Mortensen, and we've been talking with Fergus Maclean about Bankbusters. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
This campaign addresses an issue that's causing a lot of harm because Wall Street banks have created the income inequality that we're seeing all over the country, the world, and they've been stealing homes for many years. This did not just start.
We were having meetings every Sunday, and then we changed it to twice a week, meeting on Wednesdays and Thursdays. Wednesdays meetings are for homeowner support. So if you're going through a foreclosure, you have questions, you're having difficulty making your payments and want to find out what's going on with foreclosure, some of the volunteers who are coming to those meetings will go to the courthouse with you to look at your documents. So if you want to see if you have fraud in your documents, then it's a great place to get resources for that and just basic information.
Welcome back to Occupy TV. I'm Camilla Mortensen, and I'm here with Emily Reiman of the Neighborhood Economic Development Corporation. Emily, tell me a little bit about NEDCO and what you do.
Sure. NEDCO is a community development corporation that was founded here in Lane County in 1979, and we have many different programs and have evolved a lot over the years, but the common theme always at NEDCO is that our mission is to help low and moderate income families and communities to build assets and to better their financial opportunity. So right now we have a couple of different departments that work toward that end. The department that I work with is called Opportunity Works, and it works primarily with individuals and families, teaching financial literacy classes. We offer classes in counseling to help low-income families become first-time homeowners. And right now, because of the economic crisis, we do a lot of work in foreclosure prevention. Our counterpart department is called Local Works, and they do similar asset building work, only more at a neighborhood and community level. So we have other programs that help folks who want to start a small business by having a small business incubator program. We also run the Springfield Farmers Market, and we just launched the Sprout Community Food Hub to help a lot of different local food systems have a home in Springfield.
And that's given you an indoor year-round farmers market, is that true?
Absolutely, and we're very excited about that. It also has a certified kitchen for people who are starting food-based businesses but aren't yet big enough to have their own certified kitchen, so you can actually rent our kitchen by the hour to do the food prep that you might need to start a food cart or a catering business or something like that. And then there's a small business incubator just for food-based businesses that's also based out of Sprout as well.
Okay, and I know one of the issues that you yourself are working on is foreclosures, and I'm wondering if you can tell us a little bit about some of the trends that you're seeing in Lane County with foreclosures and homeownership.
Absolutely. And NEDCO has offered what we call homeownership counseling since the 1990s, but it typically was what we refer to as pre-purchase counseling. So that is helping low-income families, minority families, folks who would have trouble accessing that American dream of homeownership to be able to get their finances in order and save money for a down payment, things like that, to be able to become homeowners for the first time. In 2007, when the economy started to go down and we started to see people who are at risk of foreclosure, there really weren't resources in the community for those homeowners to turn to, but they knew that NEDCO did housing counseling, so they started calling us and saying, you know, I already own a home, but I've lost my job, or I've had a medical crisis, or something has happened, and now I'm at risk of losing that home. So we were part of a network of housing counseling agencies across the country that began to see that trend, and our housing counselors retrained to become foreclosure counselors.
And what are some of the specifics that happen to homeowners, that they start getting confused or they start missing payments, or what goes on with people?
You know, we see a wide spectrum. So early on in the crisis, we saw some of what you would typically consider families who had gotten into predatory loans or who had gotten into loans that they maybe really shouldn't have had in the first place. Mm-hmm. They were sort of the first impacted by the housing crisis. What we're seeing now are not those families, and they're not those loans. What we see typically now are very solid middle-class families who had the right house, who had the right mortgage, who did everything right, but they lost a job and they've had trouble getting another job at all, or the job that they were able to get pays less than what they made before. They may have used up retirement savings, they may have used up their kids' education savings, and they just can't make ends meet anymore. They can't keep up with that mortgage payment. And really, unfortunately, in the foreclosure crisis, homeowners who try to reach out for help have a very hard time getting it. I think a lot of people are familiar with the stories about somebody who tried to contact their bank to ask for a workout option or an alternative to foreclosure, and they're told a different story every time they call, or they're told to submit a package of paperwork, and when they do, they're told it was never received and they need to submit it again. So it's a messy system. The mortgage servicing industry is really not designed to help people work out an alternative to foreclosure. foreclosure, they're designed to foreclose. So it has taken the servicing industry a long time, and NEDCO, I think, would argue that they're still not there yet to be able to retool their systems to adequately serve homeowners. So our role in foreclosure counseling is a couple-fold. One, we're here as a general information resource for homeowners. So we offer workshops, we'll field phone calls from people who are struggling, we do individual counseling, so we have a number of options for people who just want more information about what it is they're facing, what is the mail that I'm getting, who are the people calling me on the phone, and how do they relate to me and to my house, how do I navigate this situation. And then, depending on the workout alternative that a particular homeowner wants to pursue, we can actually help with some of those. So if a homeowner wants a modification or a forbearance from their lender, which have been in the news a lot lately, I think especially modifications are kind of a hot topic, we can actually help submit those applications.
And what is that modification or forbearance as well?
A modification is basically a change in terms to the original loan. So unlike a refinance, it doesn't generate a new loan. It merely takes the loan that you have and it makes some changes to it. And the servicers actually have several options that they can play with when they're working on a modification. They might be able to offer a lower interest rate. They might be able to defer or forgive some of the principal. They might be able to re-amortize the loan. So if you currently have 25 more years of payments, they could re-amortize it over a full 30 years to reduce the payment. So they basically can change any of the terms of the loan to get the homeowner's payment down to a level that they can prove they can afford. It's a really good alternative for people who maybe had a reduction in income, or they were maybe unemployed for a while but they've been able to reemploy now, and they could make a consistent mortgage payment. They just can't make either their previous payment, or they can't get caught up on the arrears that they owe to begin making payments again. So a modification can help with a lot of those different problems. But the application can be incredibly cumbersome. You have to turn in a whole lot of paperwork to the servicer, and this is where we got the horror stories, still get them frankly, of people who sent in 50 pages of an application and then they're told that they didn't have page 7 of their bank statement, and so the whole application is null and void and they have to start over from the beginning. There were some whistleblowers early in the crisis who worked for the servicers who actually talked about fax machines that were literally receiving paperwork into recycle bins or into shred bins. It really was a very dysfunctional system for a long time. There's slightly more oversight in place now, but we still find homeowners that are submitting the same modification application 3 times, 4 times, 5 times, and they just get back generic statements saying, we haven't received it, it's incomplete, you owe us something else, without an explanation of why it was considered incomplete or why it wasn't received. So that's where NEDCO or other housing counseling agencies can step in. We have an online system called Hope Loan Port that allows us as a counseling agency to submit an application online, and it actually verifies for us that that application is complete, and then it date stamps it so that the servicer has specific dates by which they're supposed to respond to us or respond to the homeowner, either to request additional documentation or to make a determination on that application. We as housing counselors can also talk directly to the servicer, and some homeowners find that helpful just because they've been getting the runaround for a year or 2 years trying to work with their servicer and they're just emotionally done. So our housing counselors can step in if the homeowner signs a release agreement, and we can actually do some of that negotiating and some of the back and forth with the servicer. Not that we have any tools that can particularly be brought to bear on the servicers, so we sometimes still get the same runaround, we sometimes still spend 2 hours on hold waiting for somebody to talk to. But our counselors are pretty savvy with the system. We've seen enough to know what the kind of traditional tricks or problems or stumbling blocks might be that an application will run into, and we can try to prevent a lot of those from the get-go. So we do definitely have successes as well.
And you were saying earlier that one of the things that got people into trouble early on in the crisis was predatory loans. What's a predatory loan?
Loans that are basically, that have terms that are not part of the traditional market. So for example, there were adjustable rate mortgages that were a very hot topic during the housing boom, where the entry level interest rate looked really good and the homeowner could afford that loan as long as the adjustable rate interest was low, but as soon as that rate started to adjust up, all of a sudden they couldn't afford their payment anymore. There were also loans that had penalties for prepayments. So when people tried to go and refinance them at lower rates to save money later, they found that they couldn't They were actually trapped in the loan with worse terms, even if they theoretically could have qualified for a better one. So there were some examples of homeowners really being taken advantage of during the housing boom. We also know specifically that minority families were taken advantage of in greater rates than white families. So the number of African American families and Latino families who were subjected to predatory loans were much higher than their white counterparts. And in the beginning of the housing crisis particularly, much higher percentages of those loans went into default or went into foreclosure.
Oof. Is that nationwide?
Yes, it's nationwide and true for Oregon as well.
Okay. Does NEDCO also give counseling for folks who are thinking about buying a home, but with everything that's been going on, worried about how to get into getting a home loan?
We absolutely do, and part of our pre-purchase housing counseling is specifically helping people understand how to set themselves up for long-term success. So there are some things we know about successful homeownership in the long term, and it has to do with having the lowest possible interest rate. So maybe you need to work on cleaning up your credit a little bit, and you might be able to go out and qualify for a mortgage right now, but it might not be the mortgage with the best terms. It might be an adjustable rate mortgage. So we're going to counsel on spending the next 6 months or 9 months doing some work to clean up your credit so that you can get to a place where you can qualify for the best possible rates. So things like that, we know, and studies have proven nationally that homeowners who receive pre-purchase counseling have lower default rates and lower foreclosure rates later on. And actually NEDCO did a study a couple of years back of participants in our ABCs of homebuyer class. And we found that even in this economic crisis, homeowners who took the ABCs were less likely to default on their loan when compared to the general population of Lane County. So we feel very strongly that our pre-purchase program works and sets people up to be successful.
And then I understand that's part of how you came to know at NEDCO. Did you yourself went in for some of the classes?
Absolutely. This is just a funny thing that I like to share, but I actually took the first-time homebuyers class from NEDCO and worked with a housing counselor there for about 2 years before I was able to pay down debt and build up my savings and be ready to buy a first house. So that was long before I ever worked at NEDCO, and it makes me a pretty strong advocate for the power of homeownership and of housing counseling.
So it sounds like there's a lot of pre-planning that goes into. I think people tend to be like, well, I'm going to buy a house now, I have the money, but it sounds like it's a little more planning than that.
Absolutely. And a lot of people, even if they have great credit and even if they have money saved for a down payment, it's just a very complex process, and it's a huge investment, the biggest one most people will make. So there are a lot of people who come to us who don't necessarily need the financial counseling of what we do, but they just want to know the ins and outs of how to qualify for a mortgage, how to shop for the best possible mortgage, what the closing process is like, things like that can actually save them a lot of stress and anxiety and then potentially thousands of dollars in the long term.
Okay. And then I understand that there has been some things going on in the legislature, both in the past and then now with foreclosures. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Absolutely. So there have actually been some very interesting developments in foreclosure in the last year or so, starting last February when the legislature passed Senate Bill 1552 that started the state's foreclosure avoidance mediation program. And that was intended to allow homeowners the opportunity to go to mediation, to actually sit down at a mediation with their servicer present at the table and a neutral third-party mediator to try to work out some kind of an alternative to foreclosure before the foreclosure process could go through. And it was fought for and passed with support from consumer advocates all over the state, and was, I think, a huge victory for homeowners in acknowledging that there have been so many problems with the servicing industry and so many homeowners who have had to go through 6 months, 12 months, 2 years of trying to get to an alternative to foreclosure when it really shouldn't take that long. So we need more accountability, we need more oversight, we need servicers to be compelled to come to the table. 1552 was supposed to do that. Oddly, and just by fluke, it went into effect the first week in July last year, and I think exactly a week later, the Oregon Court of Appeals issued a ruling on the NEDCO case that basically involves MERS and whether MERS can be a beneficiary on a mortgage. And because of the technicalities of that case and the decision that came down, it effectively brought to a halt what we call the non-judicial foreclosure process in the state of Oregon. And until that point, I think 99%, maybe more than 99% of foreclosures in Oregon were done non-judicially, so it was done outside of the court process.
Okay, that was going to be my question, what the difference would be.
And in Oregon you can do either, but because it was more convenient and streamlined for the lenders generally, they chose non-judicial. That court decision effectively brought a halt to non-judicial foreclosures. And unfortunately, when 1552 was passed and when the foreclosure avoidance mediation program went into effect, it was specifically for non-judicial foreclosures, because at the time, judicial foreclosure was not a thing. So it was a very inadvertent loophole in the legislation that has meant we effectively have not had mediations this year. I will also add there were two different options for homeowners facing foreclosure to opt in or to access mediation. One was for servicers beginning a non-judicial foreclosure, and that would trigger mediation automatically. The servicer would have to provide a notice of mediation to the homeowner. The other was for homeowners who were not yet in foreclosure, but they were at risk of defaulting, and they would have the ability to opt into the program, so they could actually request that their servicer come to mediation with them to try to work out a solution. And that was in large part because one of the hardest parts of our job as counselors and of a homeowner trying to work out a solution with their lender is that many of the lenders would tell homeowners there was no help available until they were behind. So homeowners were calling to ask for help while they were still scraping together the money to remain current, and their servicer was actually advising them to quit making their payment.
And is that legal?
Well, I can't really speak to the legality of that, but frankly, it's just not true. There actually are options for homeowners who are current to get help, and there are actual definitions of what we call imminent default for homeowners that are clearly at risk and that should be eligible for various workout options. But the servicers weren't telling people that, so homeowners were faced with having to choose to skip payments, which would then oftentimes result in a really negative cycle of they would skip a payment and the servicer still wouldn't work with them on a modification, and then all of a sudden they're not only without a modification but behind and increasingly behind, and eventually the bank would stop accepting payments, and it just cycled out of control. So it was a really important component of the mediation bill that homeowners who were at risk would be able to opt in and would be able to sit down with their servicer before that happened. Unfortunately, there was no enforcement mechanism worked into the bill, so the servicers have very largely ignored the requirement that they now respond to at-risk borrowers. We've seen that pattern over the last year. There are only a couple of banks right now that are actually participating in that at-risk. So because there were no non-judicial foreclosures and because the servicers were largely not participating in the at-risk option, we just have had barely any mediations in the state of Oregon. And so it's a powerful tool that homeowners just aren't able to access. There is right now in front of the Senate, Senate Bill 558, which is an effort to fix many of the things about 1552 that are preventing homeowners from accessing it. So it would close that loophole of not including judicial foreclosures and would require mediation actually before either a non-judicial or a judicial foreclosure could even start. So the servicers also will not be able to do what we call dual tracking, which is pretending to negotiate with a homeowner while they're also pursuing the foreclosure. They would actually have to give homeowners the option of mediation and participate and get a certificate of completion before they could begin either foreclosure process. It would also further define what it means to be an at-risk borrower. The banks have said that because that term is so vague, that's one of the reasons that they're not able to participate with the at-risk borrowers. So 558 would further define at-risk borrowers. It would actually require that somebody at risk come to meet with a foreclosure counselor, and we as a foreclosure counselor would then certify that they are indeed at risk and they would be eligible for potential options. So hopefully that will make it more difficult for the banks to get around that provision. And Senate Bill 558 would also give the Attorney General enforcement authority over the provisions of the bill. So that's another really crucial amendment that we hope to be able to pass with Senate Bill 558.
And is this something that it would help for people to contact their
Absolutely,
legislator?
absolutely. And the bill right now is in committee in the Senate, so it's really important and I think would be a great benefit for homeowners who have experienced this problem, who have tried to reach a workout, who maybe would have benefited from mediation. But really I think it's important for everybody because foreclosure is such a community-wide issue. It impacts all of us, regardless of whether we're actually at risk ourselves or not. I think there's pretty much everybody at this point has a friend, a neighbor, a coworker, a relative who has been affected by this crisis. And then of course once it goes to a vote in the Senate, it'll move to the House and we'll need the same kind of outreach effort for people contacting their representatives.
And then really briefly, do you have any particular successes that stand out in your mind?
Sure. And we actually define success a couple ways at NEDCO. So we recognize that not everybody is going to be able to keep their home, but some can. And we want those who can to have the option to do it and to really have the servicer evaluate that on the merits. We had a homeowner that I remember particularly who worked with her servicer for about 18 months before she was able to get a modification. But she did. They got an affordable modification. She and her husband had both been able to reemploy in the meantime. And they brought flowers into NEDCO that they had picked out of their yard last summer because it was a yard they were afraid they would lose. And when their modification went through and they realized they were going to keep it, they picked flowers from their own garden and brought them into NEDCO as a thank you.
Oh, that's
and
great.
I thought that was just a great moment. And then, we have other homeowners for whom it might not make sense to keep that house, but we can actually help them work to a short sale or something else that lets them just move forward with life and begin that rebuilding process and end the uncertainty and the sort of wheel that they've been on trying to work with the servicer and work with the bank and just not reach a solution. So we actually have homeowners who come in and are, thankful and grateful that they were able to finally just move out of that home with the least economic impact possible. And we sometimes hear from them a year down the road when they've begun to rebuild and they're in a new house again, a rental for a while, but working again toward homeownership. And we actually just had the first family come in and talk to us about taking one of our pre-purchase classes because they lost their home to foreclosure early in the crisis, but they want to be a homeowner again, so they're going to come back and take our classes.
Great.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for coming in today.
Sure.
I'm Camilla Mortensen. This is Occupy TV, and we've been talking with Emily Reiman about the work of NEDCO.
May 1st of 2012 was the first time I have participated in May Day. I spent the day with local activists in downtown Eugene, Oregon. We walked to a few banks and spent a little time on the sidewalks playing kids' games and giving speeches on how we felt about the banks. Our last stop of the day was Bank of America. As people peacefully pointed out that Bank of America was not for the people of America, the local police department came in riot gear to protect the bank.
Response I've ever seen to a peaceful protest. Back your tails and run! Goodbye! Goodbye!
The banks are trying to illegally foreclose on us, but
we're not leaving!
The police will try to evict my family and I, but
we're not leaving!
Our rent goes up while our wages go down, but
we're not leaving!
The police keep trying to sweep us away like dirt, but
we're not leaving!
Stand your ground. Don't leave. As a community, our neighbors will know that
we're not leaving!
The U.S. government we trusted in has left us to the banking vultures, but
we're not leaving!
What's that? I didn't hear you.
We're not leaving!
I don't think Wall Street can hear you.
We're not leaving!
Again.
We're not leaving!
That's right.
We're not leaving! We're not leaving! We're not leaving! We're not leaving!
It's been great as a lifelong activist to have all the energy of Occupy over the last year and a half. People in the United States and around the world are becoming aware of the way the economic system is abusing them. It's become increasingly clear to me, following some of the people who come to us for help with foreclosure, going into the courts and seeing the games and the tricks the bank's lawyers use, that money is about who's telling the story. And as long as we're letting them tell the story, we're not going to get out of this fix. We've got to tell our own story about money. But before we can do that, we've got to understand where we are. And that's what I'm going to do for you right now. I've got some charts. This one shows worker productivity, wages, and income. Throughout most of the history of the United States, worker productivity and wages traveled together. Social peace, as industry became more productive, people's wages rose. That changed with the Reagan Revolution. The income of the top 1% took off, productivity continued to rise, but wages stagnated. This gap between what people produced and what they were able to take home has turned into a tremendous debt load on the American population. We can see in this chart, while wages have dropped, I believe I saw that January wages dropped 4% in 1 month alone. Corporate profits are at a tremendous high. The ruling elite is taking all the gravy, and people are losing out. How are people making ends meet? Debt. Household debt has exploded, particularly in the last few years. 20% of the population is carrying a student loan, average balance of $25,000. Almost the same percentage of American home buyers owe more on their property than their houses are worth, so they can't sell. The average credit card debt per family is $15,000. Really, you've got a situation where we're almost returning to a feudal state. And with the Attorney General declaring that the banks cannot be prosecuted for the fraud and predatory lending they're doing, it's a grim situation. The only people who benefited from the economic collapse of 2008 were actually almost exclusively the top 1/10 of 1%. 150,000 American families took home almost double the income over that period. Everybody else lost out. We see in this graph that although the economy has returned to where it was before the economic collapse, employment is 4 million jobs less than we had then. This is a long and complicated story. First, we have to understand the old story before we can tell the new story. But there's a movie that does a pretty good job of it. It's called The Secret of Oz. And we're going to be showing that at Cosmic Pizza on April 8th. It's so extreme that it's really hard to take in. But there are indications that the global bankers actually murdered a couple of American presidents before they managed to impose the Federal Reserve System on us. That was in 1913, 100 years ago. And the financial situation we're seeing now can be seen as a climax of a multi-century effort to control the way money works and to convince us that that is the proper story about money. And it's our job to change that story.
Thank you for joining us here on Occupy TV. We'll see you next time.
If you're sick of 1% types in league with government official cranks, we're breaking up the banks. If you're tired of seeing all of your tax dollars go to fighter jets and tanks, we're breaking up the banks. Don't tell us that they're too big to fail. Criminals like them should be in jail. End of sale. We saved JP Morgan Chase, slap in the face is all we get by way of thanks. We're breaking up the banks.